And good evening, everybody. Another happy Sunday night here. We're into October. So, everybody grab your favorite pumpkin spiced beverage of choice. Adult beverage optional, or it could just be something like tea or coffee or a latte or one of those crazy things. But welcome, everybody, to another episode of Talking TSR. I am your host, Chris. And along with me, as always, to my virtual left or right or whatever, is Rick. Hey, Rick, how's it going?
How is life treating you, my friend?
It's good. It's good. It's pumpkin season. It's
I
it's really
know.
good. So, my football team's 3-1, pumpkin season, it's not like 90 degrees out anymore. Yeah, it's like getting torrential rain, so it's all good. Everything's awesome. How things going with you?
Good. Yeah, this is my favorite time of the year. I love autumn. I love Halloween. I have a son who was born on Halloween, so it makes it twice as
Oh,
cool. And
nice.
last night I had the second session in person with my D&D group, which was nice. And we're actually doing the original Adventures Reincarnated one. I'm running them through B1, so
Nice.
pure classic. So yeah, all's good
Are,
there.
are you running them 5e or first edition or
Oh,
what edition?
5e. Yep.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we're doing the 5e because they're already have quite a long running 5e campaign. So I just kind of
Cool.
inserted it right in there
Awesome.
with some plans for other classic ores to be slipped in as well. So yeah.
Great. That's cool. I'm going to probably be starting a 5e playtest slash campaign, but I won't be allowed to talk about it probably for about a
Mm,
year or so. But it's still going to be pretty cool.
mhm.
I'm hoping I can gather up enough people to actually run it and everything, and have the time to run it and everything. So, looking forward to that. So, a couple of public service announcements as always, everybody. So, Empire of the Cyclops Con is coming in about a month. That's going to be November 5th through 7th. So everybody out there, make sure you guys sign up for some events or run some events. We are probably not going to do a Talking TSR episode during the convention. We normally do, but I think we're going to not. I think we're going to have enough streaming content where I think we're going to be good. And that way we wouldn't have to disrupt our regular schedule and our start time. We're not going to come at you at like 11 in the morning on Sunday or Saturday or something crazy like that. Also, the return of the charity auction. So we did some great things with our first charity auction back in February. We're going to do the charity auction again, and Master Jim Kitchen is going to be our auctioneer once again. So that's going to be exciting as always. There's going to be some really cool things. I've already contributed some very cool, hard to find, impossible to find items for the auction. And there's going to be a new episode of Coming Down the 5e Pike, where we're going to talk
Mm.
everything 5e related in our product schedule. And you never know, there might be a cool announcement or two in there. You never know. You guys are going to have to check that out. Hopefully everybody's kicked back. You've got your pumpkin beverage at this point, and maybe you've got your resting and right on your armchair. You've got your copy of Temple of Elemental Evil, and you're all ready to talk another awesome classic D&D module tonight. Our episode is A2,
Yeah.
Secret of the Slavers Stockade, another true classic following up after A1 that we did 3 weeks ago. All right, let's kick it off, Rick. Give me some, overhead view of what you think about A2.
Sure. High level impressions. Let's see. I would say I like this adventure. It's not maybe my favorite in the Slaver series, but it's kind of, dead in the middle. And I classify this as what I like to call funhouse dungeon design, in that it does adhere a
Hmm,
little bit to the recipe you had laid out in the previous show that the designers were trying to follow, as far as having one room with a monster, one room with a trick, or, this sort of thing. But I did notice reading through it again recently that the feel I get is there's a lot of challenge rooms. You can definitely get that sense of tournament module from this, that there's just a lot of rooms that, the characters have to work their way through. And when you start getting deeper in the dungeon, at least to me, logically, some of the realism starts falling away a little bit, because you run into just many sequence traps and many trapped corridors very deep in the dungeon, where you kind of say to yourself, is that goblin really, sitting on guard duty, just waiting for the rare adventure that comes that far in? They must have a really bad union, or something.
they do.
Um, and yet, it's really fun. And I think for something that It's a little bit of a slog, but for something that could be a worse slog than it is, given the number of rooms, there's a lot of genuinely interesting little areas in this dungeon. So yeah, I think it's what I call a funhouse dungeon, but I also think it works. I think it it lends itself to the fun, if that makes sense.
That's interesting that you use the term funhouse dungeon because I don't get that from this
Hmm.
actually at all. I mean, yes, there's a couple of encounters that you could probably do that. But I actually, when I think Funhouse Dungeon, I think S2 White Plume Mountain.
Hmm. Yeah.
That is amazing. I don't think I've ever heard
Hmm.
somebody describe this one that way. So that's interesting. This one reminded me a little bit about, but a little bit like the levels 1 and 2 in the Temple of Elemental Evil.
Hmm.
Another guard room, a storeroom, a weapons storeroom. But I think the one difference is, like you kind of alluded to, then there's some really compelling, interesting, complicated encounters.
Yeah.
And some of them are traps. And again, I love the detail on some of the traps. And again, for you 5e folks out there that are looking for how to design an interesting trap, you cannot do wrong by like grabbing a copy of this module and looking at some of these where it's like, it might not be the most lethal trap in the world, but it's kind of well thought out.
Hmm.
And there's definitely a few of those in here. But this module is, and we touched on it last, no, I was going to say last week, but 3 weeks ago on our last show,
Hmm.
how this was definitely not my favorite. This was probably one of my least favorite of the Slaver modules back in the day, and I think I have a little bit more of an appreciation for it. And I think the reason I did not particularly care for this one is probably the experience I had with my one main group going through it. I presented it to them. It's very much, just to let folks know, it's very much it's a wilderness stockade slash castle slash keep,
Hmm.
heavily fortified, and literally you're presented with the characters can kind of go in any way that they want. There is a front door, not advised, but they go over a wall here. They could do this. They could sneak in. And I don't think my players, I think at the time when we ran it, they just weren't used to that kind of thing. I guess they wanted the front door of the dungeon, and they were kind of at a loss of like, well, we don't know, like we don't know how to like assault a castle or a
Yeah.
stockade, and it's like, so they, and you could tell that the Gygax crowd back in the day in the late 70s, they all knew how to assault a castle. They all knew that they knew the inner workings of a castle. We were learning as kids. We didn't know what a barbican was, and what battlements were, and parapets, and that those are all things I had to look up what those words meant. I didn't know what that meant, when I was coming across this module. So I think that's probably why I had that kind of view of this module back in the
Hmm.
day.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think not even just for the players, but I think for the DM too, the fact that you have several layers of defense and you have a sort of traditional keep structure on the on the upper level, certainly on the initial
Mhm.
rooms. I could see this being difficult to run for an inexperienced DM, because you
Yeah.
can easily fall into a trap of what I used to jokingly call surround syndrome, meaning sort of where you have sequenced guards, and if the characters make too much of a rumpus, all the guards, all the creatures will just sort of filter into the one initial area. If you're playing it with any sense of realism, instead of all the creatures patiently waiting in the subsequent rooms for the characters to stumble upon them, any sensible creature will hear the alarm and take steps and do these things. And as you said, like in the modules that Gygax penned, things like G3, he would lay out defensive plans or actions that the giants would take in between forays of the characters. And a lot of people even now, they really don't play things quite that way, where they think of those sort of tactics or have
Hmm.
that knowledge perhaps of keeps and castles and those kind of things. So there could be some challenge, I think, on both sides,
Yeah.
running this. And as I mentioned to you kind of off air, the maps even on this, they're fairly convoluted and complicated, and some of the little details, for me at least, they're hard to see these little trap notations and things in the map, where I love that they blew up several areas of the map, but I almost wish the whole map was bigger or divided into sections, because there's quite a bit to the map here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, for a fairly humanoid centric dungeon, not the easiest dungeon to run. Not something I would want to grab and just wing. That's for sure. For sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and we got the dungeon map. Throw it up there too. I guess if you could throw the upper level map up there, when you
Yeah.
get a chance, that would be awesome too. Um, but that you make a good point about the tactics, because I think that is something that is definitely a Gygax hallmark. And a lot of the early writers about how they would always put some detailed tactics in there, like if the alarm gets raised, the guards from area 2 move over to area 6, and the guards in area 6, they grab their spears, or they whatever, get the oil ready or something. This actually didn't have that. Now, everything, the trappings were all there.
Yeah.
However, it did actually lack. There was tactics in the individual rooms, but there wasn't tactics overall. Where what happens if the gong is rung? Where do all the guards converge on and everything? So I actually thought that was actually a shortcoming of
Mhm.
of this module. And again, the tactics in the individual rooms were good, and I think we're going to
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit later on. How you had if this happens in this room, then the guards in the next room will come, and support what's going on here. But so I guess I kind of missed that. And then the same thing, like you said, another hallmark of the older modules was that you're not going to do it in one assault. You're going to have to retreat and recover, and then maybe assault 3 or 4 times. A lot of times Gygax and friends would include, okay, here's what happens when that first assault happens. When the second
Yeah.
time the PCs come, here's the fortifications that they make. And in the giant modules, those were pretty developed, if I recall,
Yeah.
on what was going to happen. And again, this wasn't. They even said in the beginning, oh, game master, come up with your own,
Yeah.
reinforcements, fortifications, like, replacing some of the encounters and that.
Hmm.
So again, like you said, probably not the easiest module to run for a neophyte game master, which
Yeah.
a lot of us were neophyte game masters in the early 80s,
Yeah.
because these were some of our first introductions to modules. So I think that is kind of an important part, and
Yeah.
probably one of the reasons why. And I think I know why those weren't in there. I think we're going to get to it in a little bit,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting. But I think that was a shortcoming, I think, of this module a
Yeah.
little bit.
No, you're right. For a quote unquote stockade, there's very little provided there. I mean, the only area I can even think of off the top of my head that provides anything like that, and like you said, it's really more area centric, is that sort of there's a passage that where the characters are going from courtyard to courtyard,
Yep, the courtyard. Yep.
and there's kind of details about, oh well, the goblins and the parapets might see this and shoot down. And I
hmm
remember reading it even thinking, oh, you're finally involving the the poor goblins up in the parapets, because there's once the characters kind of get past that hallway, there's not a whole lot about alarm sounding or different things going on.
Yeah.
um and yeah, it's
Which
funny.
is
It's funny how we view it differently as far as the fun house. I guess there's a line there, between what, because like you said, there's some modules that scream fun house, and White Plume Mountain is an absolute,
yes.
like the ziggurat room in White Plume Mountain, super cool room.
Yeah.
But when you look at it, it just comes up with something that really serves no practical purpose except somebody built it for an adventure to come and find,
Yeah.
and think was cool. um I guess for me it's more like again, the numerous trapped corridors. Like when you initially go into the lower level, there's several trapped, there's the Lodestone corridor, and there's another corridor, and then there's a corridor full of gridwork and boggles, and or boogles, however you pronounce it. And there's just kind of quarter after quarter of this stuff. And I just think to myself, like, the people who are walking around this place doing their regular business, do they have to go down these corridors all the time, kind of thing. And there's a corridor where the goblins dress up as mummies, or they wrap. I think it's goblins. They wrap, wrappings around themselves, and they sort of impersonate mummies. And that too, the idea that in my mind, the realism bell goes off. And I realize that's a lot to say in a game with, flying lizards that breathe fire. But the idea that, some goblin on staff is just going to every day is going to get up and wrap themselves in bandages and sit in a little secret room just on the off chance that adventurers are going to get into the heart of the stockade just seems like so off to me. And yet it's a really fun area. So I guess it depends what your realism meter is.
Yeah.
And, you know, uh, the other thing I think that struck me about this module, and again, there's a line is how humanoid centric it is. And to be sure, so many dungeons have humanoids in them, have orcs or have goblins, absolutely, they're stable. But this was one of those modules that I felt it was interesting in that the humanoids absolutely take front stage. They're not really bit players, or super secondary creatures. Yes, they have leaders, but really the goblins and the hobgoblins and stuff are the star here of this piece. And there's not a lot of modules that were kind of brave enough to do that in a big way. I mean, I think of things that came later. If we can maybe put the covers up a lot, like I think of Horror on the Hill. I know that had a very hobgoblin, if I recall, focus. And then I'm winging it with my memory here as far as the author, but I believe Chris Perkins wrote for the 3.5 era a module called Sons of Grumish that was all orcs. It was kind of like an orc fortress, and it was kind of like this done with orcs. And he did the same thing. He just orc after orc after orc, but all interesting rooms. So those two modules kind of are similar, I guess, to this one. And then it struck me that, wow, like the humanoids are really front stage. If you don't like goblins and hobgoblins, like your players, or I should say, are not going to like this adventure. That's the second thing I would say that really struck me here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with, again, there are a huge number of encounter areas in both levels, and I probably should have counted them up and compared to A1. I just didn't do that. Maybe for next time we'll have a count on the kind of a encounter thing. But yeah, and I think you're right. I think a lot of them, it does get a little bit tricky to try and make those encounters interesting, somehow, to add a little bit of something to each of those, because so it's not just 6 goblins here, 7 goblins there. Back in the day, B2 was samey like that, but you only had those little lairs were only probably 8 rooms or so, and then you were on the bugbears or something. You did have like 2 orc lairs in that, but so it wasn't 30 some odd rooms of goblins and hobgoblins, and then 30 some odd rooms of dungeons with goblins and hobgoblins in them predominantly.
That's a good example, though, that I didn't even think of, I guess, in a different way. If you want a smorgasbord of right, certainly B2 fits the bill.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree. Some of those traps and encounters, they come off as very tournament-y in the fact that, well, this is designed to test players. It's not really practical, like you said. It's not really practical for a goblin to be sitting on a stool just waiting for someone to walk down this corridor from a certain direction and then get misled for whatever reason and then go with that. So I think that's something. Okay, so let's get to a couple. Let's do some negative before we get into positive. I think let's start on a downer and let's end on a positive. It's probably going to sound like we don't like this module, but this module is really good. But let's talk about the Oliphant in the room, and that's artwork. And it's funny, when we were talking about that show yesterday, we were like, oh yeah, it's got pretty forgetful art in it. And first I'd like to say the cover art. Okay, the cover art's okay. It's certainly very applicable to the module. It's a very useful scene for this is probably what you're going to get into. But it's forgettable. It's not you don't think of this one. You think of some of the art on the other classic modules. That's like the first thing you think of. And this one's not it. I mean, at all. And then secondly, the interior art, and this is why the interior art's probably forgettable. There isn't much at all in there. there are 4 pieces that are, I wouldn't even call them quarter-page pieces. They're more like 8th page, most of them. Some of them look like they're not even specific to the module. It looks like only 2 of them are possibly specific to the module. 2 are just generic, and this sucker was like 32 pages long. It's like you get one little 1/8 of a page piece every 8 pages, basically. And I think that's why we didn't get detailed tactics and some of those other support things. I think it was so verbose, I guess, that there wasn't room for artwork. There wasn't room for tactics. There wasn't room for some of the things because they had to put the pre-gens in. They had to put, obviously the maps in and everything. So I'm guessing that's what the problem was. I'd love to know, like, I'd love to
Yeah.
talk to Harold Johnson and find out if there's somewhere there's 4 or 5 pieces of artwork. He's got the originals too that was supposed to be in this module and didn't make
Yeah.
it because they couldn't fit it in. I'd love to hear that
And
story. I mean, that'd
I
be a great
agree
one.
with your theory, kind of, being like you and familiar with, printing and signatures and page count and all this kind of stuff. It absolutely strikes me like they had to fit that stuff in 32 pages and something had to go in the art is what went, or they didn't have the budget for the art or some more, technical reason, business reason that the art was not in there. That being said, the one interior piece I love, that kind of inside cover piece of Icar, is
Yes.
wonderful. If we can
Yeah.
get that up, that is a fabulous piece. I love, super dynamic. And like you said, the front color cover shot, totally applicable, but not
Yeah.
tremendously exciting when I think of like the cover of
Yeah.
Tisoch Camp and
Well,
some of these modules that blow you
yeah.
away with the
Well,
dynamic scene.
what about having a full color iCar on the front?
See, yeah,
That with the
that
with
now
the
you put
grease
that on the
flames
cover,
dripping
yeah.
down.
You
Yeah.
put him on the cover in full color with the flames and stuff, and you've got something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I love
So
that shot. That's a great. That
I,
right there to me is
I would
it,
agree.
when I picture him and I picture that visual of him, it's great. I wish there was more of that in there.
Yeah. So all right, let's get to the,
Let's get the
again,
good
we're not
stuff.
trying to be a downer here. This
Yeah.
is a good classic module. And let's look at some of the good things. So some of the new monsters we got were solid. The Cloaker, a solid staple. Kind of interesting that the Cloaker is a classic Underdark monster, and
Yeah.
there's not a whole lot of Underdark in this. I mean, there is a dungeon, and it is kind of hooked up to the Underdark. Because we do get mentioned, there is an encounter with Drow or Dro, however you want to pronounce it. So that was kind of interesting that you had a Cloaker, but it was kind of out of its element, which is interesting. The Haunt, I used to love the Haunt character. That was a just a phenomenal, nice role playing monster to use, where you could do a lot of different things with that type of backstory. Wasn't a hack and slash kind of monster. I think it drained dexterity. I think it was, and it was like it had crazy abilities in that. But there was a real backstory to why it was undead, and I think it really gave you that impetus to make some of your other undead, give your other undead that backstory of like how did these undead become undead.
Both undead. I think both
The Phantom also.
The Phantom. I think the Haunt and the Phantom both can be really used in an interesting way by the DM to impart information to the players too. So I think that's
certainly
great. Good undead creatures there.
Yeah, and our purple little boggles. You call them boogles? I call them boggles because it's like the game. It's like the dice game boggle. So
mind.
Yes. But they're okay. I mean, they were interesting. I kind of like they had some really cool abilities, which I thought was kind of cool. And there's one really memorable encounter in there with a baby boggle that like tries to swipe something from the PCs, and it's actually kind of comical. And that was kind of cool. You kind of get a little bit of a little lighthead. So definitely the new monsters were awesome in this module. I love the main slaver, Marquesa. We talked last time in A1 how the slaver at the end, who I don't even know if he had a name in the original module. I know they gave him a name eventually in Scourge of the Slave Lords, but I don't even think he was named. He was just like a thief, and he was in a cool encounter, but like he was just like a thief hanging out in a sewer. Like you didn't even make him a were rat.
NPC. We're just gonna.
Yeah,
we're just gonna stick this thief in here because we need a leader. That's what that came off as.
Exactly. Whereas this module, we get some great, not only the leader Marquesa, but she's got some really cool lieutenants. We already talked about Icar, the blind fighter, which is really cool, with heightened sentences, and then we've got the her ogre mage ally Blackthorne. So I really appreciated the detail that was given, and she was like doing her own thing. She was like out in the middle of nowhere, and she's like experimenting on the slaves and doing surgery and crazy experiments and stuff. Very Frankenstein-like. So
I mean, she has tactics. They give word count to her tactics. She's certainly capable of giving the characters a hard time.
And a spellcaster, but a fighter. fighter magic user, so you got that doesn't wilt like a typical mage. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no, she
I
got
have
her
to
groove
admit,
in this.
yeah, that she was a high point of
Mhm.
the module because of all the nice backstory, the
Yeah.
fact that her one lieutenant was actually there like snooping on her, kind of, you know, keeping an eye on her. And it's funny, you know, when I was doing the prep for this, I almost thought that the blind guy was quote unquote keeping an eye on her, and I was like, oh no, that's right, it's not, because that would have been ironic, like to have the blind guy being the one that, yeah, send a blind guy to keep an eye on somebody. Like that's probably not a great idea.
And you know,
Um,
that kind of talking about her leads into, I guess, for me, another high point of this one, maybe even compared to A1, which I love A1, is A1 feels a little more static, where this place feels
yeah,
more like a living, breathing place that
yes,
has a history to it.
yep,
There's notes as and even evolution when you get to the caveling, as far as what prisoners have done, and you know, and just different things that have occurred here. You really get the sense this place has got a storied history, that different, you know, NPCs know each other, and like you said, or keeping tabs on each other, or possibly rivals, or this or that. There's a lot of like, a creative DM could take some of this stuff and kind of run with it a little bit, you know, much like the Temple of Elemental Evil.
yeah,
There's a lot of you know, notes as far as the NPC, and then a good DM can take it even further. And I feel like this is a very similar, you know, to the
yeah.
temple in that
And
respect.
I think it was kind of cool too. It was kind of mentioned in the background how the actual original fort stockade was not created by the slavers. It was created by other raiders, or another group, or wildlings or something like that. And they kind of took it over, and then they added on to parts of it. So you actually have that history there
Yeah.
of and a mishmash of different architecture in that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting
Mhm.
part too. That again, a game master could take and run with if you're not using it
Yeah.
for tournament purposes. But you know, I love the fact that they spent pages. They gave you the pre-generated characters again.
Mhm.
They gave you the scoring system. Interesting to note that they actually tell you in the introduction that they give you a scoring system, but that's not the scoring system that was used back at I think it was
Mhm.
Gen Con 80, I think, or Gen Con 79. That they apparently, and they're not telling you what that scoring system was, but they give you one that's very similar to A1 scoring system, but then they're like, oh, this was not the one that was used, but here you can have one to play with. And I was like,
Mhm.
huh, that's another story. That's another
Yeah.
story in there that I would almost like to, you know, the next time I'm ever in the same room with Harold Johnson, who was
Yeah.
the primary author of this one, I would love to like find out what that scoring system was. I mean, just because I'm a big tournament fan, and I kind of like that part of it and everything. But same thing with A1, there was shaded maps of what the tournament areas were supposed to be and what the non-tournament areas were. And there was a lot of areas that were non-tournament. Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously it's a big,
Yeah.
huge facility, basically, big environment. So
Mhm.
I think this module, these today, if I was to run across something like this today, I think I would be able to do a lot more with it, because of, you know, being more of an experience of a game master now after, you know, 40 some years of being a game master. I think I could probably make this one sing and probably make it do some pretty cool things, I
Mhm.
think, as opposed to back in the early 80s when
Yeah.
I probably couldn't.
Yeah, no, this, like I said, this not for beginners, I would say.
Yeah,
You know, but again, yeah, like you said, on the flip side, with an experienced game master, there's a lot to work with. And if somebody wants to slim it down, even if they're not running it as a tournament, I think that tournament map is good for kind of
yeah,
telling the characters, all right, these areas we consider kind of essential, and then you can start, you know, considering some of these areas, you know, optional. So if you don't want it to be such a slog and you have the time, you can certainly modify it down, which is nice. I'd
yeah.
rather have more than less, I think,
Oh yeah,
at the end of the
and
day.
I think they gave you that in this one.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think they definitely gave you some things. All right. Any other last thoughts? Did we miss anything about this guy you want to talk about?
Um, no, I think we'll get into some of the set pieces, I'm sure, when we hit our list. So why don't we dive into our top five?
Sure. I think I went first last time, so I think you shall go first this
Sure.
time.
All right, no problem. In that case, I will start with my number five. I think we're gonna, as usual, I think we usually tell folks this: we don't compare our lists before air. So I have no idea what Chris' list is, what his list is. He doesn't know what my list is. We kind of joke each other. We usually get some crossover, but this one may not be a crossover. This one I'm going to name right now. I always throw one odd one in there. My number 5 area, no honorable mentions. I'll go right to the 5.
Okay.
Is area 8 on the dungeon level, which is the Boogle level or Boggle level. I just think it's such a crazy area. It's sort of this, hallway with a grid. And if you understand the capabilities of the boggles, how they can kind of dimension door, but through like a limited dimension door. So this grid work allows a boggle to stick an arm in an opening, and then the arm will come out an opening somewhere else to grab something away from their characters. And you have this just very whole, and then there's also this slippery sort of oil in this corridor. And the boggles themselves are very flexible and very unusual creatures that presumably the characters have never run into before. And I could think this hallway could be tricky to run. I've run it in the past, and it's not, for me, it wasn't the easiest thing necessarily to run, to keep track of where the boggles are and that kind of thing. But I just think it's a cool area. It's very unique if the characters go in there as opposed to just a hallway full of goblins. All of a sudden, with these arms coming out in different places and the slipperiness and the flexibility and the unusual nature of the opponents. To me, it just really, for a hallway with a bunch of this one creature type in it, I think it's very cool. It's a nice introductory encounter to that creature type, to just make it clear to the characters, all right, these guys are something a little different. So that's my number 5, the Boggle Lair.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, thinking about it now, it's like I'm like, this is like the hallway dungeon. It's like there's a lot of
yeah,
lot of hallway stuff going
absolutely.
on here. There's rooms and everything, but all the action seems to happen out in the halls and everything.
Yeah.
It's like definitely they seem to take it to that level. So, okay, so my number 5, also on the dungeon level, area 2, called the entry hall. At the end of this hall, hidden behind the hollow wall, is the lodestone, and I love this idea.
Mhm.
Again, not sure exactly if this works. There's this whole, what armor is ferrous and what's not. But anyway,
Yeah.
they kind of hand wave that, and they say if you're wearing scale mail or greater, you get within 15 feet of the wall, and you're all of a sudden you're pulled toward the wall. You actually take damage flying into the wall, and then you're stuck against the wall. And the wall is, I guess it's stone or wood. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but you don't know exactly why you're stuck to the wall. Well, I guess you could probably figure out it's some kind of magnetic force, but it's a little confusing. And then, basically the way to get off of the wall, unless you're strong and you don't have as much metal or metal gear or metal armor on, you can actually kind of scoot along the wall like 5 foot per round. But otherwise, you have to take your armor off. And we all know that in first edition, if you ever caught without your armor, that's not a good thing. Like if you fell in the water and you had to take that plate mail off, it was probably not a good day. And then there's a guard room right nearby, and the goblins, as soon as they hear people slam against that wall, they come run out through a secret door, and then they bludgeon you with their clubs and that, which is awesome that they didn't give them heavy crossbows or glaives or something like that could just, rip the PCs to shreds. They gave him clubs, and it's like a slow beat. It's like the death of 1,000 bops on the head kind of thing. Which is probably a game design choice. Probably, I probably would have given them glaives, and they could have stood back and just, the 1 die 10 damage kind of deal. But anyway, I love it. Lodestone's not used that much. If I recall, and if my modules were not so hard to pull out right now, I think there was a lodestone encounter in Q1 in the Demon Web pits. I think that's like another one that there was some sort of a lodestone encounter, if I recall. If anybody knows that in the chat, that would be great. My modules are kind of all packed up. I can't just walk over to a bookshelf and pull Q1 off like I could. But anyway, that's my number 5. The Lodestone entry hall dungeon level area 2.
That's a good pick. It almost made my list. And it's probably my favorite hallway trap in this whole dungeon. So yeah, I thought that was cool too. And I like the fact that the guards do have a way to turn it off, so they don't have to kind of deal with this thing walking down the corridor all the time. So they, at least that provision is written into that they kind of, I guess in times of alert or something, they can turn it on. So yeah, very challenging. And my players can tell you, I'm infamous of depriving them of their armor by throwing them into water,
The
deep
classic
water
trope.
pits and things like that, especially when we played first edition. So they probably would have hated me if I would have given them the lodestone as well. And I did run at least one group through this. So there was a group that, at some point hit that. I don't recall how it went in that particular corridor, but I know they did go through that corridor, one of my old time groups. But yeah, good pick. All right, going on to number 4, and here we're going to hit one of the what I call set pieces. Would be area 12 in the dungeon, the torture chamber. I thought this was a cool area, something that I think a DM can make a lot of hay out of this one. You've got one of the precious few illustrations that shows the entry to this area, and it's nice because it gives you a sense of the elevation, the stairway, and kind of imparts some important information. So it's a relevant, specific illustration. But yeah, there's just a lot going on, and I'm like you. I think I like detailed rooms with a lot going on. There's the burning chandelier that that is a factor. There's
Yes.
bugbears with howlbears, which you don't see all the time, and then there's wargs that can kind of come in as a second wave and get involved. And then if you start going and digging around the room further, there's other things that the characters can run into, including a sort of sealed up rabbit warg if they didn't have enough trouble with the initial wargs. So just for the reasons of just a really cool layered combat, because you've got the trap and then the halberd humanoids and then a wave of wargs coming in a cool looking room anyway. That's my number 4, the torture chamber. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I love the fact that it gets its own blow up map.
Nice. Okay. That one, well, we'll see. But that one was in contention. We'll see if it makes my list or not. My number 4, this is on the upper level. This is area 35, the kitchen. Again, this is one of those other set pieces, complicated encounter. Actually, Valena, if you could pop up that picture of Icar, the guy with the grease in his hands, of the title page, that would be awesome. So yeah, this is a great, lots of stuff going on here. First of all, I love the map where they give you another map, a blow up map, and they show you the starting positions of all of the monsters. I love that, and I think this is the first time they've done that. That used to be a staple, if folks recall, in 4th edition. I know that's the edition we don't like to talk about, but that's one of the things that they did in like all their encounters in 4th edition. And later in 3rd edition. So I love that part of it. You have Icar, the blind fighter, and his tactics are just awesome. You have wereboars, which start off as humanoids, and then they like duck behind a table and they turn into boars, and then they charge you.
Yeah.
And you got hobgoblins. But really, this is all about Icar and his tactics. He has a ring of fire resistance, so he uses the fire pit. He's right next to the fire pit, so he either pushes you into the fire pit, or I love this. There's this huge lizard, giant lizard, I guess, that's cooking in the fire pit. He stands in the fire pit boldly and uses the lizard as cover. I love that. Uses the lizard haunch as cover. And then then he also could just grab globs of grease, fiery grease, and hurl them at you. Which is just amazing. Obviously, it was on the title page artwork there. We talked about it. It was the one awesome piece of artwork. I love it. There was all sorts of stuff going on in this room. I love the map. I love the terrain. I love that there's interesting things. There's the fire pit to maneuver around. Just a great, one of those at the end of the encounter. Everybody's just like, wow, that was awesome. It's like there's a great encounter to run and then like end the evening on that note. Because it's just like everybody probably had a really good time. So that's my number 4, upper level, level 35 at the kitchen.
Nice. All right, moving on to my number 3. My number 3, and I'm sort of cheating here because I'm going to name a suite of rooms because it was almost impossible to really separate one out. So I'm going to say the suite of rooms 16 and then all the letters, which is the Madman's Lair. And if you remember, this is the area where basically a prisoner who is on his way to escaping, presumably, ended up holing up in this little section of the stockade on the upper floor. And then he ends up, perpetrating a ruse and making the humanoids think that the area is haunted. And there's a lot of different effects in all this little kind of suite of abandoned rooms. and it's a lot of fun. You know, you can have characters go in here and kind of encounter these spooky kind of different things in different rooms, and slowly kind of piece together what's happening. Maybe after one or two rooms are explored, you know, your character, your players will clue into the fact that, hey, you know, it's not really haunted, it's something else going on here. And that little backstory of that guy, I just think it's a cool, fun area. I think you can really get some life out of it if you play it the right way. It can be almost humorous. And then it also can kind of serve as a hole up room for the characters after they kind of deal in one way or the other. I had characters that actually sort of ended up befriending this guy in some fashion, if I remember. But basically, once they kind of eliminate this hermit like prisoner as a threat, the characters presumably could use one of these rooms to recuperate in, and it's like a fallback area on the first level. So anyway, that's my number three, is the kind of suite of rooms that constitute the madman's, you know, lair, the false haunted area on the upper stockade.
So I got a question. So is that where you're kind of getting the fun house element from this module? Because I would agree that little suite of rooms, there's 4 or 5 of them or whatever,
Yeah,
it kind of feels like a little bit of a fun house there.
that's part of it. That's
Okay.
certainly, I feel it more on the bottom level than on the top level.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, but that suite of rooms, the room, the if you're looking at the upper level, the hallway with the mirror, and then, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, the mention of the false kind of mummies.
Yeah.
uh, some of those areas, just, yeah, it strikes me as it would be damned inconvenient for people to be going through these areas on a regular basis and not, you know, stumbling through. I think it's a cumulative effect of all these. If there was just one of
Okay.
these things or one or two, but the fact that, like you said, it feels just like that, a hallway dungeon. It feels, because there's just hallway trap after hallway trap after hallway trap. And to me, some traps are a little more natural. There's an area with you know, some beehives, and somebody thought to put a bucket of syrup over a doorway so if intruders come in, you know. And to me, that's more of a natural trap. It's not, as long as people know that bucket's there, it's not a big inconvenience. It makes
Yeah.
sense. They need it. They didn't put the beehives there to, you know, as a trap. They're using the beehives for the regular thing, and somebody made use of that. Whereas some of these other areas, I can't even imagine how people would move through this. Even the cavern where you have to jump across the rocks and the steam, it's right in the dead middle of the dungeon, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, there are some secret kind of hideaways, I guess, around for Marquesa to move around past that area, but the majority, presumably the guards in this dungeon, and humanoids, would have to go through that area every time, you know, in the course of their regular business. And it just, to me, it almost doesn't make sense. Again, it's a fun area. I love that cavern room, but as right in the middle of a living, breathing dungeon, it that's what gives me that fun house. You know, to me, it makes no
Okay.
more sense than the giant crab in white, you know, in White Plume Mountain. It's
Well,
just
yeah. We
uh
went down a rabbit hole there, folks. Sorry. Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. It's like, woo. So that was,
Well,
sorry. I probably should ask that question earlier, not when we
yeah,
were
that's
in
all
our
right.
top list, but okay.
All right.
So that was your number 3.
That
That
was
was
my
3.
number three.
Okay.
Yes, we're on number
So
three.
my number 3, on the upper level, it's a suite of rooms, number 16, the Madman.
Ah,
So not only did we cross over with some kind of bonus, we need like a whistle or a bell or something, but we
really?
crossed over in the same number. I agree. This part of the module, definitely one of my favorites. I love the backstory. Like you
Yeah.
said, there's a backstory here. The little touches, the fact that in one of the rooms there's a broom that he uses to sweep his footprints away so that they can't track him back to his crawl space. Just the little things like that. And just the fact that each room there's a little bit of a gag kind of a thing that he
Yeah.
does to try to give you that. Again, reminds me of Scooby-Doo a little bit, reminds me of U1 Secret of Salt Marsh. I mean, I love that
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. Yes.
It definitely reminds me of Salt Marsh a lot, which is one of my favorite ones. So I
Mhm.
love that. I love that in the bedchamber, like he lured in one of the hobgoblins and actually got a noose around him and actually hung the guy, and then
Yeah.
he cut off his hand, and then he left the body there to scare the other ones, and apparently even said that the hobgoblins sent the other hobgoblins in as a dare into that room, and then so I like the fact that they really kind of immersed it and really kind of gave some backstory to it, to the encounters and that. And you're right. In the beginning, the PCs are probably like, "Whoa, what the heck is going on here?" And then eventually they figure it out. And you're
Sure.
right. It's a place for them to hold themselves up where the guards probably are not going to come in. So for that reason, also my number 3. The Madman, upper level, area 16.
All right, there's crossover number one.
It is.
Well, here comes crossover number two.
There we go.
My number two area is Area 35, the kitchen.
Yep, of course.
There's no way I could not pick this area. It really almost made number one because I find Icar such a compelling villain. As I guess he's the second in command in the place, or something along those lines. But the whole thing about his blindness and his tactics with the fire that you described so well makes him such a super unique, cool villain.
Yeah.
Just to think of the blindness factor and give him this special helmet, it's just so intriguing for the characters, to run into this guy and see this, picture. And then we have a great picture to back it up. Wonderful. And then when you add in the werewolves, where they're they kind of just very casually, without getting panicked, throw their axes at the intruders, but then they duck down, change, and then come back in a different form, which could really throw a loop at the players. I think that's great. And then you've got lots of cool cover in this room. You could really, have a lot going on with the, enemies taking cover behind barrels and tables and things like that, knocking over furniture. So yeah, all the makings of a great knockout drag down fight here. So yeah, that's my definite solid number two, Area 35, the kitchen.
All right. I look forward to what number one is now. So, okay. My number two, not a crossover, or is it a crossover? Dungeon level, area 22, Marquesa's lab. So by this point, if you're a regular viewer of the show, I love big, complicated encounters. This encounter is over a page long. A page. The whole module is 32 pages long. A whole page plus designated to this encounter. I love it. There's the individual map with the monster locations. I love that. This is it. You're going up against Marquesa, the main slave lord. Great tactics in here. Great use the spell list. Not a wasted spell on that spell list. There's something that you can do with all of her spells, which is great. I mean, she's only a 5th level spellcaster, but just phenomenal. Love that. And I love owlbears in cages. And then, the hobgoblins or goblins, the elite goblins, they spend an action and run over and open up the cages. So now you've got rampaging owlbears in the room. I love that trope. I have used that so many times over the years, releasing all kinds of things, dragons that were, chained to the floor, other big bad things in cages, just all kinds of things. I love that trope. It never gets old. It's just, it's very cinematic, I think, where you've got some big creature in a cage and then, one of the little sniveling orcs or kobolds just plucks that little, the little stopper out of it, and then the cage bursts open, and now you got to deal with that, or preventing him if you can take that, take the orc down before you can get to the lock or whatever. I love that. This encounter it's just brilliant on a lot of different levels. I just love that it's so complicated. I love the tactics. It's one of those ones where, I would always run that encounter and then be like, oh, I forgot about this, or oh, I forgot about that, or oh, I should have done this because this was in there too. And it was like so much going on that you can't keep track of everything. And those are the encounters that my players always remember, till the end. They remember when they rolled 20, they remember when they rolled a 1, but they remember the big, huge set pieces where there was a lot going on and it was a very dynamic environment. So that's my number two, dungeon level, area 22, Marquesa's lab.
Nice. Well, ding.
Yep, I thought
area
so.
number one, area 22, Marquesa's lab. As usual, you've done a wonderful job of describing it. And when I look at my notes in front of me, I've got 2 bullet points, that I put that I didn't want to forget. One is owlbears, one is spell tactics, because cool, compelling villain who really knows how to use her abilities. So right there, you're off to a good start. And then the environment's cool. The fact that you have kind of much like the werebears, the wereboars in the kitchen, you've got that sort of staged, leveled encounter here with the owlbears, because you can kind of have a fight that's proceeding for a little while and then all of a sudden bring in the owlbears. And I love those sort of tiered encounters. I have a lot of fun with those. And frankly, it's also a good DM way of, if things are going too easy, you bring in the owlbears a little later, a little earlier, or whatever. It provides a little adjustment for the DM, and it just keeps things so dynamic. So, yeah, I love this area. It's my number one. It was an easy pick. I think it was really that in the kitchen. They kind of doing this, but because I love them both. Two super cool, detailed, complicated areas that either one super memorable for the players, I think. So yeah, easy number
Wow.
one. Kessa's Library.
And in the chat, Sky 2 dropping a ZZ Top line. Look at that. Wow. And putting a nice little spin on it. Yeah, that was nice. Whew, that's gold right there, man.
Pun in there too. Okay.
Yeah. That's I need to design an encounter on that now, something like that. And so okay, my number one. So we've had three crossovers, including one double bonus crossover.
Your number one. I'm very
So this is gonna be funny. This is I guess this is probably where I'm gonna probably get some flack, because we do not have a crossover for my number one.
Okay.
My number one is upper level number 19, the Mirror Corridor, which you have already dumped on several times. I know how you feel about it now. You've dumped on this encounter. I love this encounter. Again, does it make sense where it's at? No. Is it silly? Yes, completely. Is it? Yeah, Funhouse. It is, but it's an awesome tournament encounter. I guess if I was to take this encounter up and just move it into a list of tournament encounters that were railroady, but you run into them. I love it. I mean, it's a huge long corridor. There's a mirror set 45 degrees. You think the corridor goes longer, but it really doesn't. It gives the illusion that it goes longer because you've got the mirror, and then you've got hobgoblins that are wrapped up in gauze that look like mummies, and I guess they walk like mummies, but they're not, which is just when you're a 4th level character and 3 mummies come around the corridor, down the corridor, you're probably freaking out at that point. Sure. You're probably letting the fireball go. And that's exactly what they were playing up to, that you're going to let fireball go. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to realize you just wasted your fireball. And not only that, you're probably going to toast yourself because of the mirror and everything. But anyway, it's interesting. And I love the fact that there's a mirror that they can drop down behind the characters too.
Yeah.
And then they could actually give you the double whammy there, where it's then you can think, oh, wait a minute, why is behind us now look really far away? So again, I love the tactics. It is silly, but I think it's interesting. It's one of those, I think this is the encounter that when I think of this module, I obviously I think of the kitchen without a doubt. And I think of this encounter, believe it or not. This is one of the ones that have always kind of stayed with me. I'd forgotten about the Madman. I'd forgotten about the lab. I'd forgotten about some of those other encounters, but this one I remember. And so bring it on, bring on the hate. I love it. So
no, I think it's interesting. It's fun when we cross over, but it's as long as we've been doing this, it's always interesting to hear those things that stick, because I knew there were areas like this in there. I knew there were sort of these tricky corridors, but I honestly I didn't remember this area. And yet the Madman I absolutely now again, maybe it's because it was tied to actual play for me that's
probably what it was.
I think that's a factor in our remembering these things sometimes is obviously if you had a good experience with your people at the table, as opposed to maybe simply reading it. And we've been around for long enough, folks, that we've run all these things. I think
I've said that overall. People have complained to me that in my top 5 or 10 classic modules of all time, Egg of the Phoenix is there for me, and everybody's like, Egg of the Phoenix, that's a terrible module and all that. But why is it why is it so beloved by me? Because my group had such an amazing time in those modules. I mean, we had so many amazing memories, amazing encounters, and amazing role playing that was not from the page of the book, but and that just it brings it up notches. I mean, is it the best classic adventure written? No, but I love it for a lot of reasons, and I think that's part of it. And that's why people do top lists, because there's no right or wrong answer. This is my list is not better than Rick's list. His list isn't better than somebody else who remembers this, but but that's the beauty of this. You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
And
It's
it,
just
and
it's
you know,
what
isn't
you
that the
remember.
beauty of D&D in general, is that
It
I
is the
think
memories.
every group that's got any, length to it, has those encounters or those dungeons that they just remember so well and so
Yeah.
fondly. I remember a Goodman Games party way back when, and a bunch of us were meeting for the first time. People that had worked with Goodman, for quite a while and worked with each other for quite a while, but we
I know
hadn't
where
met.
you're going here.
Do you?
I do.
And we were at a bar in either Milwaukee or in Indianapolis, and I remember Harley Strobe kind of finally having the wits to break the ice because people kind of making small talk. And then he came in and he said something along the lines of, what's your favorite module and what's the most memorable encounter you ever ran, for players, or he said something like that, and everybody just started leaping out with these different, and it became the most fun conversation because there was just such a wide range of adventures and impressions and things that stuck with different groups that I had never run or never thought of running, or like you said, the Egg of the Phoenix, never viewed it as a bad module, but it wasn't something for my group that's super memorable, and yet I have many good memories with Tumahars that I know people loathe. So it's part of the fun of D&D, I think, is how all our groups, we have our individual, group
Yeah.
memories about these things that just makes it special, and every group's got their own special memory. So yeah, no right or wrong, right? It's all good.
Yeah, no, it's all really good. So, all right, so that is our top five list, and we are almost at the top of the
There, yeah.
hour, so we're good to go here. So, all right, why don't you tell us about our next show, Rick?
Sure. Well, we were going to be coming back at you folks in 3 weeks on October 24th at 8 p.m. And we're going to continue right along with the Slavers series here. We're going to go right into A3, Assault on the Area of the Slave Lords. And we haven't talked yet about the sort of redone version of this, the Scourge of the Slave Lords. So we might touch on that, I think, next episode as well, because that's a little overdue. So we're just going to keep the mojo going and keep chugging on right through this series of modules. So again, that's on October 24th. If you're enjoying the show, please give us a follow. If you catch us later on YouTube, give us a little subscribe, or at least give us a like for the video. And keep those comments coming, folks, because we love, I think Krista will tell you in a second, we love to read these comments. Your impressions on this show, what you like, what you don't like, what books you want to hear us discuss. We love to read your input there, so keep it coming.
Yeah, yeah. This show is it's as much as your guys' show as it is our show. So, we want to hear what you guys want us to talk about. Or if you guys are tired of talking about the slavers, then maybe we'll talk about something else.
Yeah.
But we just figure we're gonna strike while the iron's hot, and kind of nice little package here of doing 4 shows based on arguably one of the more classic series of modules that are out there. And we really and we've been having a hoot. These have been great. These have been a lot of fun to review these and get into the comparisons of them and everything. And I'm looking forward to Scourge of the Slave Lords. I love it. I love that. That was definitely the most ambitious part of the super modules that they did. I mean, obviously T1 through 4 was there. Was already a super module, and in the G's there was 7 modules that they made. So this one was only 4 modules, so they really had a lot of room to make some significant additions to, and I really appreciate that. So. All right, so let's put a bow on this show. It's been another awesome time kicking back here on a Sunday night, like we're at a bar at Gen Con at the end of the con. Actually, it's Origins is ending this week, so maybe we're in Columbus, downtown Columbus, Ohio, and we're kicking back at the bar, and we're enjoying an adult beverage, probably a pumpkin ale of some sort, most likely. There's football going on in the background, and we're just talking about how our games went for the day. And we're going to wrap it all up with our pearls of wisdom. So, Rick, why don't you go first with the pearl of wisdom?
Sure. Well, riffing on something I mentioned earlier and sort of making it into a positive, I wanted to touch back around again on funhouse style design and actually touch on, again, kind of advice for the DM that funhouse style design, that's not always a bad thing. Certainly, if you're writing for your own group and you're not, say, writing for publication, for a more widespread audience, there's nothing wrong with that approach. There's nothing wrong with adopting funhouse style or a more tournament style dungeon. You know, I think there's such a feeling in the air, especially these days, of realism and verisimilitude and this kind of thing, that it's easy to fall into the traps of making very similar dungeons and putting in your living quarters and putting in this and that, and forgetting some of these fun rooms. And this is an example of a module that's full of fun rooms, full of, you know, fun, memorable, puzzling encounters for the characters to fight their way through. And those are the things that your players are going to remember. So I would encourage that when the time is right, and if you have a group that's, you know, that's down with that kind of thing, go with the funhouse type design once in a while. You know, let realism slide a little bit, and just put in some fun, challenging encounters. And I almost guarantee your players will not mind one bit. Instead, they'll probably remember the encounters. So it can be a very good thing as well.
Love it. Love it. Excellent advice there. Excellent advice. I had originally a certain pearl I was going to go with, but then you know what? I'm going to mix it up at the last second here. I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'm going to go with, again, the reason we play these games is the memories that we make at the table. And that's really what it's all about. I've always said you can have an amazing adventure, but if you don't have a great game master, and possibly you don't have players who take the cue from the game master, you might not have a great story. But if you have a substandard adventure, or even an adventure that's maybe not the best in the world, maybe it's just a bunch of caves with humanoids in them and not too much else. But if you have a great game master and or players that can then take what the cues are, you can make some excellent memories. And I think don't be afraid to put some of those non-classic modules in your top 5 or your top 10, because really that's why we do this. The reason why I get behind the GM screen, and why, you know, we gather around the table, is to make memories and to story tell. It's not like reading a novel where it's only going to end one way. It can end in one of a million different ways, because the dice can be fickle. The characters, oh, it's real easy, they just got to find this secret door, and they don't find the secret door. So that's what I would say is don't be afraid about, you know, the memories, and you know, talk about some of those other classic modules that might not be on the typical lists, but are on your list. I think those would be totally fine. So
I can't agree more.
Excellent. With that, we are going to say goodnight. And again, we are going to see everybody in 3 weeks from tonight, on October 24th. We look forward to seeing everybody. With that, everybody have a great night, and be safe out there. Happy gaming.